So you've heard me mention a few times in other videos that my seats have had a bit of a mouse attack. Ordinarily they'd all be this nice red leather. Instead, quite a lot of it is this nasty chewed grey foam. And even more than that, there's a good few places where the foam's been chewed through completely, straight back to the plastic. The problem being that despite all this damage, which clearly needs fixed, most of the budget I had for getting these seats done went to sorting my exhaust, which means that I'm going to have to do something about it myself. Now, as much as I'd love to keep these original and restore them to the factory finish, well, I just don't have the tools or the knowledge or the skills to be able to do any of that. So I'm going to have to do something different. On the current Elises, you get these things called club racers, and the seats in those are basically a bare plastic seat shell, which is identical to the thing that's under all this, which is painted body colour, and then instead of the full thing being upholstered, they've got a series of pads for the back, the head, and then a big pad for the bottom. And they actually look really good. Now, I've seen one other person do that with the S1 seats, so I know you can do it. And to be honest, it doesn't look massively difficult. There's a bit of a caveat to that though. It doesn't look massively difficult if you know how to sew. I do not know how to sew, so this will go one of two ways. Either I will convince a family friend with a sewing machine to, sew this for me and get on board, and this might actually turn out looking decent, or I'm going to have to borrow a sewing machine and try and sew it myself. And the last time I sewed anything was bits of paper in third year HE, and that didn't go great. So either way, I will have something to sit on at least. Let's get started. We'll strip everything off of this and get it back down to a bare seat shell.
I am the one who knocks.
So this is what the seats look like now that they're all stripped down. You can see the leather is all gone and all of the foam is stripped away. On top of that, I had to get rid of the glue. Now what was a 30-second montage for you guys was a 3-day experience for me of sanding and scraping and getting stuff called cellulose thinners, which is just about the most toxic stuff we've got in this garage, soaking a rag in it and then using that to dissolve the glue to make it easier to scrape. Now you can also see I've gone over a few of the divots and holes and nasty bits in the fiberglass and just filled them in, sanded them down. Next step for these is to prime them and paint them. As well as that, I'm also going to go over these interior bits like what covers my handbrake mechanism and my gear stick, and paint those yellow as well, just so it all matches the theme. Well, I've finally got all the interior plastics nice and painted up. I have my nice yellow seats and my nice yellow centre console to match my nice yellow car. Now I say finally, because you see, when I first started this idea, I looked at some seat shells on the internet, they were nice and smooth, they had gel coat on them, so I'm like, hey, you just pull off the old leather and foam, you put some new stuff on, Bob's your uncle. Not quite. You see, in 1997, Lotus had a slightly different idea of quality control to what they do now. And by that I mean, if it wasn't being seen, there wasn't any. So there were 1 or 2 casting defects and air pockets that I had to smooth out, sand, and get ready for paint. Just a little bit of sanding.
As we approach day 12 on this abandoned sandy island, I think of the world that came before. A time when there was more than just the sound of sandpaper on fiberglass or the pitter-patter of rain on my makeshift spread. A world in which we are not defined by grits of abrasionness, of thickness of paint, of depth of filler, and I yearn for a time when I can return to that world. A free world. A world where I am free from the sandpaper. But that day is not today.
But anyways, now that we've got that all done, everything's smoothed out and looking quite nice to my mind. So what we do now is we get some templates made up so that I can see where the foam's going, transfer that over to the foam, get it glued to the seat shell, and then we'll make up some patterns and get my nice red suede material, put over the top of it, and then these can go back in the car. So after a bit of cut and stick, here are the templates for the side pads. Now we're actually going to put those onto the seats before we do the bottom and back pads, just because the width of the foam coming in will dictate how wide I actually make them. So what we need to do now is transfer them over to foam. And speaking of foam, here's what I'm using. Now this is pretty high density stuff. As you can see, it's very thin. And upon getting this, I realised it was a bit too thin. And I don't really want to build up multiple layers of this stuff, so what I'm going to do is fill the bottom in with this thicker stuff. Now you might be wondering, TJ, is this a camping mat? Yes. Yes it is. So I'll use that to fill in the bottom layer, and then I'll use this stuff to go over the top and also do this curve over the rim there. So next up, more cutting. So I've got my foam side panels all glued in. Both pieces are laminated together, and you can see the blue stuff curves over that rim just to give it a nicer feel. Next up, I'm going to have to go with my seat pad and my back panels. And I've had a thought about that. Because you see, I'm going to have to shape an awful lot of foam for this. And some of it really is quite thick and has quite a few curves through it. And I've been watching videos where people are going at them with bread knives and turkey carvers and stuff like that, and it seems like a lot of effort and a lot of mess. And to be honest, I'm always up for avoiding a lot of effort. So to get out of doing a lot of effort with a bread knife, I'm going to sink a lot of effort into something else. We're going to make a hot wire foam cutter. Because you see, I've got some scraps about, some bits of aluminium X channel, some spare wire, and a bit of resistance wire as well, that I think I can turn into one. And that way, it should just glide right through the foam and let me do all my shapes without really much effort at all. So let's give it a go. So after watching a few YouTube videos of other people putting these things together, this is what I've come up with. Got a bit of resistance wire here, current goes through it, it gets hot. Split pin goes up, split pin goes down. This lets me control the resistance and therefore the heat. The wire that's connected to it goes to one end of a car battery, with the wire under here going to the other end. Bit of threaded rod at the back lets me adjust it side to side, and this bolt loosens off, lets me adjust it back and forth. Those two are really just to help get the wire straight. Now, I really want to sit here and cut stuff with this, but to do that, first of all, I've got to get more templates done for my seats, because then I can cut the bottom pads and the back pads, and it's all really just one big excuse to lightsaber stuff with this thing, to be honest. But I really should get back to it. So shall we? So after setting up to about 2:30 in the morning last night cutting and sticking cardboard, I've got a full set of templates. However, now it's time to turn those into foam. And speaking of foam, this is my old seat pad. It's not very thick, it's made out of that horrible chippy gluey stuff, and to be honest, it's that solid that you could kill someone with it. So this stuff is out. What we're going to be using is this. Now this is high density polyurethane foam, which will be much more comfortable. And you're probably looking at that and thinking, TJ, your seat cushion's going to be that big, your head will be sticking out the roof. And you're not wrong. The reason this is so thick is so that I can cut my entire seat pad out of one thick bit of foam, instead of layering up multiple thinner bits to get that shape. Now once that's all been cut out and done, we move on to the back pads, which I'll be making out of this stuff. Now this is 1 inch thick reflex foam, which is also quite high density, And it feels a little bit like memory foam, but according to the guy in the foam shop, they are two very different things. Then once that's all sorted, we go over it all with this Dacron batting, which will stop the material from slipping, and also it will make the corners and the edges look a lot less boxy and a bit more rounded, which should give it a better look. Anyways, that's enough talking about upholstery supplies. I want to fire up my wire cutter and cut. So after another late night out in the garage, I've got all of my foam cut, covered in batting, and now sitting in the seat shell roughly where I want it to go, just to give you an idea of how it will look when it's done. You'll also have noticed that when doing my main seat bases, I added a little something extra in there, and that is in the form of a gel seat pad insert. You get these for things like motorbike seats, or actually Lotus themselves put something very similar in the base of the Series 2 seats, just to make them a bit more comfortable. See, I drove that thing every day for about 2 years straight in those original seats, and I know things about discomfort that no one should know about discomfort. I've been uncomfortable enough. I deserve a bit of extra padding, you know? The hot wire cutter also saw a lot of action there, but not in the way I thought it would. You see, originally it was meant to be for doing the side profiles on these big thick bottom pads, but when you're moving that much foam through the machine, you've got to put the split pin right up the top so it'll fit, and it just brings the temperature too far down, the wire isn't hot enough, you get a perfect cut up where the template is by the time you're halfway down the foam, the wire's bending by the time you're at the bottom, it's just cutting all over the place. It just wasn't coming out even. So I ended up having to finish those off with this electric turkey carver. In fact, the second seat pad I did, which turned out a bit better, so that one's going to be my one in the driver's seat. Did completely with this thing. Lesson learned there, if you're going to carve one massive chunk of foam, this is probably the tool for the job. However, the electric wire cutter was brilliant for doing my back pads, and actually anything that really needed anything precise, curves, awkward little shapes, the wire cutter was perfect for it. I just couldn't get them neat or even with the electric carver. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some people out there that are like Jedis with that thing, but I ain't one of them. With the electric wire cutter, you just get it up against the template, gives you a perfect cut, nice neat curves, worked out great. So now that the foam's done, we need to move on to fabric. And now we can't just cut a chunk of fabric out, slap some glue on there and stick it over the pads. Well, at least that's not what I'm gonna do. What we're gonna do is make patterns out of this stuff. Now this is masking paper. You basically just put it over stuff that you don't want to get paint on. It's not sticky, it's more or less just brown parcel paper. So I'm gonna make patterns out of this, test fit it onto the foam, and then I will transfer those over onto the material, cut that out, and then glue it down. So let's get messing around with this paper and these pins for a bit. I've discovered something. I don't think this is how you're meant to make these templates. So I went onto the internet, went onto YouTube, and watched a few other people making these kind of things. And they don't use templates. They just mark the fabric around it, cut it, and then sew it together. Probably because they actually know what they're doing. Now, I've got a family friend coming up who's going to help me sew this, and by help me I mean they're going to sew this. So instead of faffing about with this stuff, I'm probably just going to hand them the foam and they'll know what to do from there. So hopefully in the next cut I'll be back with more upholstered seat cushions and less crumpled up bits of foam and stabbed fingers. Seconds ago I was sitting playing with brown paper and pins. Now all of a sudden I'm in a fully upholstered car. Now you might be thinking, TJ, that's a bit of a leap. And you're not wrong. You see, I did film all of the gluing and the cutting and the putting the material down and getting it on the door cards and doing my sill pads. But sadly, right after I filmed it, before I could transfer it all over to my computer, my little phone looked me in the eye and killed itself. So that footage is gone. And the best I can really do for you is to show you around the interior. Now I do know that this has taken quite a while to do, and I've got a good reason, because I've been driving the car too much. Every time I should have been working on it, I was driving it. In fact, my first drive was done with a bare seat shell and a seat pad covered by a pillowcase. And I did film it for you. However, the camera was very shaky and I didn't do much talking. I was mostly just cackling and floating the throttle, to be honest. So I'll cut that into another video, which will be a sort of my impressions after spending a bit of time with it. So that will come up at some point. In the meantime though, let me show you what I've got here. So here's some close-ups of my finished interior. You can see that the seat pads are all upholstered and stuck down to the seat shells themselves. Now you will see a couple of imperfections here, and that's nothing to do with the stitching. Francis would come out with everything perfectly lining up, seams all on the edges, hand them to me, and I'd try and copy the same effect when gluing it, with mixed results. However, I do genuinely think these look pretty amazing. Only thing I'm unhappy with about the seats though, is on the bottom seat covers, there's a couple of bits where the glue actually got onto the surface material and has left a few marks there. However, you can't see them when you're sitting in them, so I'll live with it. At the same time, I also did in my sill pads. I was a little worried about these coming up creased or that, but they all sit dead smooth and I think they look really good. And then once I've done all that, well, I didn't really want those black plastic door inserts ruining the theme. So I've covered them too. And that, you pretty much just spray them with glue, lay the material over it, and try and make sure there's no air pockets. And last, but absolutely not least, because I'm actually really happy about this little touch, was Francis managed to replicate the leather pouch that goes over my gear stick cover in the same material. So I've got a wee elasticated thing to stick my phone in when I'm driving around. So now that the upholstery's all done and in the car, well, that's the last main job of this build. Car's pretty much done, to be honest. Don't really know what to do with myself now. I mean, I'm not going to have any more nights living in the garage for a while. I can go on a computer without spending all of my time looking things up about Honda leases. No more time huddled over tables, bolting and unbolting and gluing and sticking, and don't really know what to do with myself now. I mean, I guess I could drive the car instead of work on it. Yeah. Sounds like a plan to me.